Thank you all for coming out tonight to our first Lou Douglas lecture for this school year. I'm Linda Tiener. I'm the Executive Director at UFM Community Learning Center. UFM is a campus and community educational program that was started by K-State students 49 years ago. We'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary next year, and I hope that you will pay attention and participate in things. We're going to be having activities all year long to celebrate being 50 years old. Our lecture, the Lou Douglas Lecture, is named for Professor Lewis Douglas, who was a professor of political science at K-State for a very long time. He was one of the founders of UFM and one of the founders of some special programs that UFM has had for a long time. And when he died, we named the lecture series after him. Lou was very interested in conversations among disparaging groups, talking about lots of different kinds of things that were going on, very concerned about social justice, and talking about things in a democratic way. And our series tries to honor him by talking about social justice issues that might be of interest to our campus and our community. Following our lecture tonight, we will have a short question and answer period. We ask that you come down to the mics to ask your question, but I will also let you know that Keith will be here following the lecture to be able to answer questions individually too, if you would rather visit one-on-one. I'd like to, at this time, recognize our co-sponsors. We have several that are participating to help fund this lecture tonight. K-State Student Governing Association, Housing and Dining Services, the Care Office, the English Department, and Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies all came together with UFM to provide the funding to bring Keith to Manhattan. At this time, I'm going to introduce Mackenzie Leckleitner, who's with K-State Housing and Dining Services, and she will actually be introducing Keith to you. Mackenzie.
Good evening. It's good to be with you all tonight. It's my pleasure to be up in front of you tonight, not only as a representative of K-State Housing and Dining, but also as a representative of the K-State family. As we talked together as a Lou Douglas Lecture Series committee, we really wanted to engage with what are issues that we see happening and affecting not only our society, but our K-State campus. And the issue of sexual violence and rape culture came to the table pretty quickly. It rose to the forefront as a part of our conversation because we believe that it's something that we want to continue to engage with and we want to learn more about. As we consider our role in this highly sensitive but not unfamiliar topic affecting all of us, it's my pleasure to introduce someone who I think is going to do a wonderful job of digging into that deeper. Not only can you read more about Dr. Keith Edwards in your program, but I'd like to highlight just a few of the things that he's done with his work. Over the past 15 years, Keith has spoken and consulted at more than 150 colleges and universities. He's presented more than 150 programs at national conferences and has written more than 15 articles or book chapters on sexual violence prevention. I hope that you'll join me in welcoming him, and I hope that you'll engage with me in these next 60 minutes. Keith, come on up.
Thank you. Good evening. It's great to be here at Kansas State, or K-State. I understand that's an important distinction. It's been fun being on campus and being able to visit with some of the faculty and staff throughout the day and some students throughout the day. I was last year at K-State 17 years ago, almost exactly. I interviewed for a job here, didn't get it, so I guess now I'm back. You can't get rid of me. I'm really happy to be here and grateful to be a part of this exciting lecture series. The fact that I was on a webpage with Charles Blow, who will be here in a few weeks, is pretty exciting for me. So I'm really grateful to be here. How many of you are college students? Okay. What you know, how many of you are new first-year students? Okay, awesome. What the people who have been college students, who are our college students, know that you first-year students are maybe even already learning, is that this experience will change you for the rest of your life. Who you are at graduation when you walk across that stage will not be who you are when you arrive. In fact, many of you will walk across that stage of graduation and have a hard time recognizing the person who arrived here. You're going to be changed by the courses you take, the things you're involved in, the people you meet, the relationships you build, and the communities that you're a part of. I don't know how you're going to change. That's up to you and the experiences you have and the meaning that you make of them. But what I do know, in 20 years of being a college student, working on college campuses, working at colleges and universities, what I do know is this experience will change you and change you forever. And certainly your academic experiences will do that, but nothing will have a bigger impact on how you are changed during your time here than the people who are sitting next to you tonight, the people who are in your community, the friends that you're going to make, the people you're going to disagree with, the relationships you're going to have, the people you're going to fall in love with, the people you're going to fall out of love with. All of those things are going to shape your college experience. And I'm excited to be a small part of helping you think about the kind of community you want to create here at K-State to make this a place that not only is safe, but also a place where you feel like you can not just survive, but you can grow, you can learn, you can transform, and you can thrive. And so I'm here to talk particularly about how we can do that around sexual violence, but I think much of what we'll talk about tonight will be applicable in many different things and help create a community for you that will help you transform, grow, and thrive in many different ways. But I am here to talk about sexual violence and really how each one of you can be a part of the solution to preventing, reducing, and potentially ending sexual violence. But I want to be careful about this term because the media often uses this term in interchangeable ways that can sometimes be confusing and sometimes, frankly, is just wrong. So I want to be careful about this term. Sexual violence is a broad umbrella term that includes many different things, from sexual harassment to sexual assault and rape, but also includes stalking and intimate partner violence. So when we use the term sexual violence, I want to be clear about what exactly that is, because we kind of get this confused sometimes. So when we talk about sexual violence, I want to talk particularly about the difference between sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. And we're going to be talking about all of these forms of sexual violence tonight. So the first one is words or gestures of a sexual nature that are unwanted, words or gestures, that's sexual harassment. Touching of a sexual nature of the penis, breast, buttocks, or vagina, or clothing covering those areas is sexual assault. And penetration without consent is rape. And so sexual harassment and rape are part of a continuum of sexual violence, but they're not the same thing. Just like penetration is a form of touching, so all rape is a form of sexual assault, but not necessarily is all sexual assault necessarily rape. So when you read about sexual assault happening in the media or happening on campus, we can't always assume that that's a violent attack and necessarily rape. It may be. But it may be something else on the continuum, like grabbing someone's body without their permission at a campus event, like a dance or something like that. That is also sexual assault. But there's a big difference between that and rape. So we have to be clear as we're thinking about this that these are a continuum of behaviors that involve many different behaviors. So as we're having this conversation tonight around sexual violence, I want to be sure that we're not just talking just about rape. We are going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about touching without consent of a sexual nature and sexual harassment, which is words or gestures without someone's consent. Okay? So as we talk about sexual violence, I want to ask a quick poll. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. None of them are very hard. Okay? They're all going to involve hand raising. Some of them you're going to have to actually answer. This is actually going to be the hardest one we're going to do all evening. Okay? Based on the definitions I just gave you about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape, raise your hand if you've known someone in your life who's experienced sexual violence. Raise your hand if you've known someone in your life who's experienced. All right, look around. I'd say about 75% of you, and I consistently see this, in campus after campus after campus, about 75% of us say we've known someone who's experienced sexual violence. So this isn't a hypothetical. This isn't something that happens somewhere down the road, or this isn't something that may possibly happen. This is a very real part of the reality of the college experience. What I also tell you is that those of you who didn't just raise your hand, you do know if people have experienced sexual violence. They just haven't told you yet. I'm not going to ask you to respond to this question, but when I do ask this question through anonymous polling and other things, how many of you have experienced sexual violence? About 25% of you would raise your hand. So this is real for those of you who are in the room, for people who we love and care about, and things that have happened to us. And as I engage in the conversation tonight about what we can do to prevent sexual violence, address it, change the community so that's no longer acceptable here, some of what we're going to talk about might hit close to home for some of you, for things that have happened to you and for those who you care about. We have folks who are here who can touch base with you. We have 2 folks from the care office who can, you want to raise your hands at them? They'd be happy to talk with you. If you're a faculty or staff member who could talk to students who may be seeking some support, could you just raise your hand and do that? Thank you. So if this hits close to home, it's totally understandable. And if you need to reach out to folks who can provide the support for you, I'm certainly happy to talk with you, and you have other resources who are here, and that's so important. But what we also know is that 75% of you just said someone has told you they've experienced sexual violence in your life. And so we have to be very clear about how we can support those of us who come to us and share with us they've experienced sexual violence. Now, none of us wants people we know and we care about to come to us and say that they've experienced sexual violence, but it might happen. So I want to talk very briefly about how we can support survivors of sexual violence. If someone comes to you and says, I want to talk with you about something that's happened to me, they've been likely very deliberate and very selective in coming to you. And we don't know what that reason is, and you probably won't know what that reason is, but they've chosen you. And so you have a huge responsibility to be there for them in a way that can be helpful for them. And so there are 4 steps that I want to suggest that you can support those people in your life. Now, the folks who work in the care center and do advocacy and do support of survivors, they have much more complex skills. But for those of us who don't do that work on a day-to-day basis, and I greatly admire and appreciative of those who do, these are 4 simple things that hopefully you might remember if someone shares it with you. So the first thing I would suggest is make sure that they're safe. Have they been injured? Are they harmed? Do they need medical attention? Are they safe in the place that they live? If the place they live includes the person who has harmed them, is there somewhere else they can be? So the first thing we want to do is make sure that they're safe. The next thing we want to do is believe them. If someone tells you they've experienced sexual violence, it is highly likely that they're telling you the truth. People don't make up stories around sexual violence. The FBI and the US Justice Department tells us that people falsely say they experienced sexual violence about the same rate as people falsely say that someone stole their car when that didn't actually happen. It's very limited, maybe 3 to 5% of the time. And if someone comes to you and says they've experienced sexual violence, your job is not to investigate or adjudicate or resolve that. Your job is to believe them and to support them, right? So if they come to you, resist the urge to try and sleuth it out and figure it out. Just believe them. Just believe them. Just believe them. And then the third thing is to just say over and over as often as you can, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Because of the culture that we live in, many survivors of sexual violence experience victim blaming. And it can be very traumatic and it can be very hurtful. And most often the place where the victim blaming begins is with themselves. Because we all want to believe if sexual violence has happened to us that it won't happen again. And so we start to try and convince ourselves, well, if I hadn't done that and I don't do that again, then I can feel safe. So most people begin victim blaming themselves, and you don't want to contribute to that. You want to reduce that as much as possible and saying to someone who's experienced sexual violence, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. No one is responsible for the violence that others have perpetrated on them, no matter what. No matter what. And so if you find yourself saying over and over and it feels redundant to you, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, you're doing a great job in supporting a survivor. And then the last thing is to empower them. When someone has experienced sexual violence, their choices and the decision-making about what happens to them has been taken away. And you don't want to replicate that in your efforts to support them. So empower them to make decisions about where they go for help, whether they go to the care center, whether they see someone in the counseling center, whether they report it to campus or off-campus authorities. You may feel like you know what is important to them and what they need to do, but don't make that choice for them, because that's another choice taken away from them. Empower them to make decisions. If they couldn't be in control of what happened to them, they can be in control of how they respond to them. So the 4 things, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I want to tell you about a really difficult experience I had, they may not even name it as sexual violence, but just these 4 things hopefully are simple enough for you to remember. Are they safe? Believe them. It's not your fault. And empower them to be responsible and in charge of their own healing. All right? So now that you're equipped with some pretty foundational skills about how you can support survivors and not contribute to the victim blaming that they're maybe experiencing, I want to talk about how we shift the approach from responding, which is very, very important. But if your campus was perfect at responding to sexual violence and never got that wrong and always did that perfectly, which is impossible, you would always be responding to sexual violence, because responding doesn't prevent it from happening in the first place. So I want to talk about how we have talked about sexual violence on college campuses and really in our societies and communities at large. We have talked about sexual violence primarily as a women's issue. There's some good reasons for this and some bad reasons for this. The good reason is We've talked about sexual violence as a women's issue because women's organizations and feminist groups have done the vast majority of work on this issue for the past 40 years. Almost all of the work on this issue for the past 40 years. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to them and the work that they've done. They're the reason why laws exist, shelters are in existence, and resources are in place. Before 40 years and the work that those folks did, these things happened, but we just didn't have language for them in many cases. So we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the women's organizations and feminist groups that have laid that foundation. We also talk about this as a women's issue because it happens to women. And it does happen to women. Sexual violence does happen to women. But it also happens to men. And it also happens to trans and gender nonconforming folks. So to say that sexual violence is a women's issue because it happens to women is not very inclusive. It's also a really bad approach to the challenges that face us as a society. We don't do this in any other way that we take on a challenge in our society effectively. It would be like if we had an epidemic of drunk drivers hitting and injuring and killing pedestrians in town, and we responded to that with courses about how to walk across the street. That doesn't make any sense, right? That makes no sense whatsoever. But for 40 years, we've said sexual violence happens to women, and so here's how women need to deal with that. That doesn't make any sense. It's not only not inclusive of the sexual violence that happens to men and trans folks, it also is purely a reactive or response approach, which is not a preventative approach. And although sexual violence can happen across gender, those who experience greater rates of oppression experience even greater rates of sexual violence, including people of color, working class people, gays and lesbians and queer folks, just to name a few. Although sexual violence can happen across gender, what we also know is the perpetrators are overwhelmingly men. When women are the victims of sexual violence, the perpetrators are overwhelmingly men. When men are the victims of sexual violence, the perpetrators are overwhelmingly men. And when trans folks are the victims of sexual violence, the perpetrators are overwhelmingly men. So if we're going to stop this from happening and really be proactive about this, we need to stop thinking about sexual violence as a women's issue, and I would suggest we need to start thinking about sexual violence as a men's issue. Now, thinking about sexual violence as a men's issue can be really hard, particularly for those of us who are men. When I first heard this message, I was very defensive and really pushed back on it. I felt like I was being blamed for the actions of a few. But then I thought about it, and I realized that it's actually very empowering to me as a man. Because when sexual violence is framed as a men's issue, there's a number of roles that I can play in preventing sexual violence. I can make sure I'm not engaging in behavior that is sexually violent. I can challenge the behavior of my peers who are men and challenge the comments they make, the behaviors they do, the things they talk about, and the way they think about things. I can also join with people of all genders in my community, including folks like you in this community, and create communities where sexual violence is unacceptable, rare, and maybe even doesn't happen. When we talk about sexual violence as a women's issue because it happens to women, all I can really do as a man is say, well, that's really too bad. I hope it doesn't happen to you. And there's nowhere for me to be a part of that solution. But thinking about sexual violence as a men's issue is actually very empowering for us as men because we can be a part of the solution. And if we're going to be a part of the solution, we have to shift away from the reactive approaches. And the reactive approaches is traditionally what we've done on college campuses and in society in general. Raise your hand if you've ever heard messages about don't walk alone at night, don't wear that, go with your friends, come home with your friends, watch your drink, don't drink too much. Raise your hand if you've ever heard these messages. I've never been on any college campus where those messages haven't been heard, particularly we direct those messages at women, oftentimes beginning in 7th grade. I've never been anywhere where those messages aren't understood. Now, whether they're always followed or not is a different story. But those are purely reactive. They only say, here's how to respond to being in a place where we know sexual violence is going to happen. When those are the only messages on a college campus or a community about sexual violence, what we're really saying is, hey, we know rape's going to happen here. Here's how you women need to deal with that. We have to do better than that. We have to shift away from just these reactive approaches. We need to add to them proactive approaches. And proactive approach means prevention. Now, when we say these reactive approaches, don't walk alone, don't do these things, it can lead to victim blaming. And to the extent it reduces risk, it just stops it from happening to you or happening to you. But it's not stopping it from happening, it's going to happen to somebody else. So it's not really prevention. If we're going to be proactive and prevent sexual violence from happening, we have to talk about who is not just who it is happening to, but who is perpetrating it. And what is going on for them so we can understand them, so we can reach them and prevent it from happening in the first place. We don't just want to prevent sexual violence from happening to those we love and care about. We want to help prevent it from happening to anyone, period. if we're going to be proactive, we have to really understand the realities of sexual violence on campuses. So what we know is that 1 in 4 college women report surviving sexual assault or attempted sexual assault. And again, sexual assault is any touching of a sexual nature without consent, including, but not just limited to, rape. Now, this doesn't even include the sexual violence that happens to 1 in 16 college men or trans folks. But just when we're talking about college women, 1 in 4 college women report surviving sexual assault or attempted sexual assault. And when we start to see this, for many of us, this doesn't fit with the way the reality as we know it. When I arrived at college, this was not the reality that I understood. When I arrived at college, I thought rape was a bad, terrible, awful thing that happened pretty rarely, and I'd see it on the local news. Maybe once or twice a year. Awful, terrible, tragic, but pretty rare. Kind of like murder, right? Terrible, but not super common. And when I first learned that 1 in 4 college women reported surviving sexual assault or attempted sexual assault, it didn't fit with the way I'd been taught the world works. And if this doesn't fit with the way you've been taught the world works, you might begin to try and explain this away in a few different ways. The first way we might begin to explain this away is say, well, that must be some ancient statistic done in the Dark Ages that has no bearing on the reality of the world we live in, probably done by some left-wing radical feminist. Then you look at these citations. Mary Koss at the University of Arizona, who first did this study in 1987 of more than 6,000 college students. Now, she definitely is a feminist. I don't know if she'd call herself a left-wing radical feminist, but that was 30 years ago, so that is some time ago. But then you'd see the next citation, the US Justice Department. Now, I assume in the room tonight we have people with many different political views and perspectives, which I think is great. We can probably all agree, though, that in the year 2000, the US Justice Department was not a left-wing radical feminist organization. Can we agree on that? Now, some of you wish it was, some of you wish it wasn't, but it wasn't, right? We can agree on that. And then in the year 2011, the US Centers for Disease Control. Now, that's only 6 years ago. What we see is in national study after national study after national study, and many studies on college campuses specifically, we see this number come up again and again and again and again. We like to think we're living in a society that is progressing and getting better and better every day, and in so many ways that's true. But when it comes to this issue, not only is there no sign of progress, there's actually evidence of no progress. And so we have to change the approach that we've been taking. We have to go about this in a different way. Now, if you begin to accept that 1 in 4 college women report surviving sexual assault or attempted sexual assault, then the next thing you might do, if that's not the way you've been taught to view the world, is you might say, like I did, wow, this is happening way more than I thought. There must be a whole bunch of these skeevy, smelly sociopaths who are mentally ill and can't tell the difference between right and wrong, who hide out in the bushes and are violently attacking all of these women, and I'm just not hearing about it. Now, stranger assaults do happen, but it's actually very rare, particularly on college campuses. What we know is that of these 1 in 4 women who experienced sexual assault or attempted sexual assault, 84% of them knew their attacker. So it wasn't a stranger in the bushes. It was their lab partner. It was a homecoming date. It was their friend who offered to walk them home from their car. We all want to believe in the stranger in the bushes, because if you're worried about sexual violence happening to you, as scary as that person is, pretty easy to avoid, right? Don't walk alone at night, avoid bushes, you're pretty much good, right? And if you're worried that you might do something that could be sexual violence, all you have to do is say, I don't hang out in bushes, I'm not a sociopath, I'm good, right? It's not that simple. I wish it was. That would be a lot easier problem for us to tackle. But what we know is of these 84% knew their attackers. Now, if you believe this, you might get a different image of a perpetrator. This might be a good-looking, charming, really smart guy who lures women into situations. As soon as he gets them alone, he violently attacks them. And that does happen. But it's also a very small percentage of the perpetrators, particularly on college campuses. What we know is when we ask college men, have you ever engaged in behavior that met the legal definition of sexual assault? We don't say, hey, are you a rapist? Because we all know how to answer that on a survey we're going to turn into people, right? We say, have you ever done this, 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 or this? List of about 10 things that all meet the legal definition of sexual assault. And of the men who say, yeah, I've done one or more of those things, of the college men who said they'd already engaged in behavior that met the legal definition of sexual assault, 84% of them did not describe what they had done as illegal. 84% of the men who had already engaged in behavior that was sexual assault didn't describe what they had done as illegal. This means that particularly in college campuses, the most common perpetrator is not someone who can't tell the difference between right and wrong hiding out in the bushes. And it's not even a jerk who's looking to manipulate and harm and overpower people. The most common perpetrator of sexual assault on a college campus is a nice, well-meaning, well-intentioned guy who's looking to hook up and have sex the way he's been taught his whole life. The problem is with how we have taught him to hook up and have sex his whole entire life. We literally teach men to rape women, we just don't call it that. We call it playing a game, we call it hooking up, we call it all sorts of other things. And just because someone has been miseducated their whole life does not absolve them of any accountability or responsibility. In fact, I think it makes us more accountable and more responsible. But the challenge here is not to put you in a room and tell you sexual violence is bad, don't do it. That's totally ineffective. That's what 84% of the men who committed sexual assault said too. The challenge here is not to teach you what sexual violence is and plead with you not to do it. The challenge here is actually much harder. It's to help you unlearn all the things that you've learned. And as college students, you know learning's hard, right? And what's harder than learning? Unlearning. Unlearning the messages you've gotten from TV and movies and magazine ads and song lyrics and parents and health teachers and older siblings and friends in the locker room or the chapter room or the classroom. These messages are all around us. So our task here is the unlearning. One of these nice, well-meaning, well-intentioned perpetrators who's been miseducated their whole life might say something like this. Although I truly believe this encounter between us was consensual, I recognize now that she did not and does not view this incident the same way that I did. And this is oftentimes, when I investigate sexual assaults on college campuses, this is often the conversation I have. Someone will say, I experienced sexual violence. This happened to me, I didn't want it to happen, I didn't consent to it, and here's how that played out. And I will listen, and I will say, thank you, I appreciate the trust you placed in sharing that with me. It's often very difficult to share. It's often very difficult to hear. And then I will talk with the person who she, almost always a she, said committed that. And it's almost always a man. And when I meet with him, he says to me, Keith, I will tell you everything that happened between us. And when you hear everything that happened between us, in every detail imaginable, there's no way you or anybody else could possibly call this sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape based on everything I've been taught my whole life. And he's telling the truth. The problem is with everything he's been taught his whole life. And to see that play out and for him to realize that something he did 3 months or a year earlier was actually sexual violence, no one wants to be in that position. No one wants to find out that something they did to find out later was actually sexual violence. And no one wants to be a survivor who finds out a year or 3 months later that their perpetrator didn't mean it. He's going to take care of that. No problem. I'm not worried. No one who's a survivor of sexual violence is reassured by finding out that the person who did it didn't mean it. In fact, that can oftentimes increase the trauma and hurt that caused, right? But it's our responsibility as campuses and as a community of students to make sure that no one ends up here as a survivor of that sexual violence. And it is also our responsibility to make sure that no one ends up here as well as a perpetrator who finds out after the fact that what they did was actually sexual violence, but they didn't understand that at the time. Our responsibility is to make sure that neither one of them ends up in that situation. And we can do that by changing the culture on this campus, changing what is acceptable, what is okay, and shifting that. The challenge for us is that we have to talk about what is the difference between what is sex and what is rape, or what is making out or hooking up or having sex, and what is sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. Now this is challenging for someone who comes to campuses and speaks because I've never been on a campus anywhere where a college student has come up and said, you're the dude who's going to talk later, right? And I'm like, yes, I'm going to talk later. Great, we're so happy that you're here. If you could just explain to us what the difference is between what is sex and what is rape, that would be super helpful. We're all very confused. No one has ever asked me to do that, right? And that's because, it's not because we have the right answers, it is because we are very well miseducated. We are all very well miseducated by our culture and the messages we get about what is making out, what is hooking up, what is having sex, and the message we get about what is sexual harassment, what is sexual assault, and what is rape. And we've just touched on a few of those right here already. So what we have to do is really unpack what is consensual and what is not. And the difference between making out, hooking up, and having sex and sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape is simply informed consent. And your timing is just great. Oh.
Maybe. Don't know what it's doing.
All right, I've got great slides, but we'll continue on and hopefully we'll get it back. So that consent means When we have informed consent, 2 words, informed consent. When you have informed consent, then it is making out, hooking up, having sex. And when you don't have informed consent, there we go, perfect. Can you move, there you go. When you don't have informed consent, it's sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. So I want to break this down. We'll come back to the informed part. I just want to talk about consent. Consent is, at every step of the way, affirmative consent that is freely given. So we'll just take these each one at a time. At every step of the way, it means you have to get consent at every step of the way. You have to, how many of you are familiar with the baseball analogy for making out and hooking up? First base, second base, third base? Now what I've learned in my time doing this is we all have very different definitions for what happens at those bases, particularly second and third, but whatever you think it happens at second and third base will work for this. So we have to get consent at every step of the way. We have to get consent to kiss, we have to get consent to touch, we have to get consent to take clothes off, we have to get consent for anything that comes along in this, right? So you can't make out with someone and then consider that an agreement to anything else, right? You have to get consent at every step of the way. Does that make sense? Absolutely it does. That's not hard, that's not challenging. You know this is the right answer. In our baseball analogy, you can't hit a single and then stand on third base. You're gonna be out. That's how baseball works if you're not familiar, right? So this makes perfect sense. It doesn't seem very confusing. It's not very controversial. And then I was having a conversation just like this, and one guy raised his hand. He said, I have a question. I said, this is great. If you have a question, maybe other people have the same question. Let's hear your question. I'll answer it, and we'll help everybody be as clear as possible. This is really great. And he said, my question is, why would someone make out with me if they didn't want to have sex with me? Oh, boy. And I said, seriously? He was like, seriously. And I said, there could be like a million reasons. He's like, I don't know. I said, there could literally be like a million reasons, like a million reasons. I was starting to sound like Lady Gaga. He said, I couldn't think of one. I said, well, I can think of 4 off the top of my head. He said, this would be great. I said, well, maybe she never wanted to have sex with you. She just likes going around and making out with people. She never wants to go any further. We call those the kissing bandit. Do you have that here? Don't point at people. Don't point at people. Don't point at people. Some of you are like, that's me. They don't know it yet, but they will. That's my move. Nothing wrong with that. As long as it's consensual, you just like making out with people, great, good for you, right? And he was like, no, she was really into me. I was like, all right, great. I said, well, maybe she's worried you have an STD. And he says, no, not me, which is what everybody with an STD says, by the way. Everybody, right? I said, okay, maybe she has an STD and she doesn't want to give it to you, and that's super generous. And he says, no, she was really hot. And those things aren't related at all. Those things are not related at all. There's an inverse correlation, probably. All right. I said, well, the 4th reason is maybe she did want to have sex with you, but then she made out with you for a while and decided she didn't want to have sex with you anymore. He was like, no, that's not that one. His friends were behind him. It's the 4th one. It's bad. It's slobbery. There's a lot of saliva. It's gross. We've seen it. It's not good. It's the 4th one for sure. The point is, I have no idea why someone would make out with you and not want to have sex with you, because there's too many reasons why that could be the case. And if we're honest with ourselves, he's not the only person who learned that if someone agrees to this, then they're agreeing to other things that come after that. I mean, I've learned that. Haven't you learned some of those things? So when we talk about at every step of the way, and we say you have to get consent at every step of the way, we all go, yeah, duh, obvious. But then we've also learned some messed up stuff along the way. So we have to remember the accurate information that makes perfect sense and help ourselves unlearn some of the messed up information that we've learned along the way. We also, this at every step of the way, also needs to be affirmative consent. Affirmative consent is not controversial at all. Campus has been using affirmative consent for more than 30 years now. Affirmative consent is a super simple concept that you all understand. How many of you have ever seen a stoplight in your life? Raise your hand. Now, I don't want to make assumptions. I grew up in a town of 89 people. We didn't have a stoplight, but I'd heard of them, right? Let's do this all together. When you come to a stoplight, red means? Stop. Green means? Go. Yellow means? Go really fast. Excellent. Yep. Great. Some of you slipped some curse words in there too, didn't you? Right? You slipped that in, which is fine. Now, we all know there's no one in this room who doesn't know that yellow means slow down and proceed with caution. Everybody knows that, right? We know that that's the right answer. And somewhere along the line, a parent, a sibling, a driver's ed teacher taught you something else, right? And when you're late and you're in a hurry and you come to a yellow light, what's the little voice in your head? What does that say? Punch it, gun it, hit it, we can make it, go for it, right? Some of you think you're like in a movie scene, right? This is exactly what we teach people about hooking up and having sex. This is exactly what we teach people. We think we teach people that if someone says no or stop and the other person doesn't listen, that that would not be okay. That's true. That's not really what we teach people. But if it were, that would be true. That's a red light. And I think we all understand that if both people are in agreement and they communicate that and they're both consenting, that's totally fine and that's absolutely true. And we all know that if we're in a hookup situation and someone hasn't said anything or is silent or it's ambiguous or unclear or they've agreed but you're not sure what they've agreed to, that you're at a yellow light. We all know we should slow down and proceed with caution. We should figure that out with the person we want to hook up with, right? But we've also learned very different messages. We've learned things literally to go very fast. We've learned things like go for it before their parents come home. Go for it before their friends come back. Go for it before they change their mind. Go for it before they sober up. And not a single one of those is consent. Not a single one of those is consent. We often hear rape described as the presence of a no. That is an accurate but terrible definition of sexual assault. The right definition of sexual assault is the absence of a yes. Anything other than a green light is not consent. A red light is obviously not consent. A yellow light isn't consent either. Only when someone has said yes, and you said yes to the next thing that's going to happen, do you have consent. Right? Now, if you're at a yellow light and you're a hookup situation, and you're with someone who you find really attractive, and you'd say, hey, I'd like to do this next, is that okay with you? And they go, yeah, that's a yellow light. I have no idea what that means. I mean, that could be yes, maybe not now, maybe next week. It could be no. It could be I'm not in the mood. It could be indigestion. I have no idea what that means. None, right? And if you're in a hookup situation, does that mean your night's over? No, it means you got to communicate with the person you want to hook up with. And I know some of you are thinking, you want me to communicate with the people who I'm going to hook up with? This is going to ruin my love life. No, it's not. That's ludicrous. That is absurd, right? Communication is what makes the hookup possible, right? It's the only way you can be sure you have consent and you're not engaging in something else. It also makes it much more enjoyable, right? People who don't communicate have learned this lesson, right? You go to kiss and you bump teeth and now you both have a headache. You go to caress and you end up tickling someone and now it's weird, right? You go to put things somewhere and the other person didn't want them put there exactly. You can explain that to your friends on the way home, all right? So communication not only makes it possible, a green light is the only way it can be possible, and it also makes it much more enjoyable. But that's not what we learn in TV and movies. And I'm not talking about pornography, which is a whole nother level of sexual objectification, degradation, dehumanization, and tricks. I'm talking about TV shows that are on at like 9 o'clock at night, movies that are rated PG-13. Let me know if you've ever seen this. This is what I see in these movies. Someone walks in the door, and their eyes lock. The lights go down, the candles come up, the bass music comes in. And without saying a word, because they're so in love or so hot for each other, they just know what the other person wants, and they glide across the room. They don't walk, they glide across the room. And they have a beautiful kiss because they just know, they're so connected, they're so tied in. And then they glide to the bedroom. They don't walk, they glide to the bedroom. Where you have backlighting so you get a silhouette but no nipple because that would make it rated R. Who's seen this? Anybody seen this? Anybody seen this? It's way too familiar, isn't it, right? This is how being with someone intimately, whether you're in love or in lust or whatever, is depicted in TV and movies over and over and over and over again. We're probably in the room, we're all thinking about probably 60 different movies right now, right? Over and over and over again. That's total science fiction. That is complete science fiction. I'll tell you, for that to happen in my house, a couple of things. One, I've got to install a dimmer switch. That's hard. It's hard. I can probably pull it off, but that's hard. Getting the music to come on at just the right time, boy, does an iPhone make that easier than it once was. Technology's great, right? I got to light a whole bunch of candles at just the right time. And let me tell you, that is totally illegal to do in your residence halls. You're welcome. The other problem with that is that if you're ever tempted later in life, when you don't live in a residence halls, to light a whole bunch of candles at just the right time to create a romantic or sexy moment, let me tell you, that is a high-risk maneuver. Not just because of the fire hazard. You can get that wrong in one of two ways. You don't light those at the right time, you're halfway through, and now you're just you're not pulling this off right, you got some candles lit, others not, you don't look like you know what you're doing, not sexy, not sexy. Or you get it wrong the other way. You light those candles, you get them all lit, it's really nice, that person runs late, they stop at the grocery store, by the time they get there, you're just a really hot person in a well-lit room, and most people aren't into that. Some people are, but most people aren't into that. So that's a really high-risk maneuver. I also have to install some sort of conveyor belt system in my house. I'm not doing that. Like, that is way beyond my competency, right? Now, I can install backlight, right? That involves a lamp and a curtain. I'm not totally incompetent. I can pull that off, at least, right? The other thing that is science fiction about that is that two people who are so in love would know what the other person is thinking. That's not how the world works. You know this. Raise your hand if your parents are still together. You think they have any idea what the other person is thinking like 80% of the time? No, no. And my parents were divorced when I'm 9. I can't even imagine that they ever had any idea what the other person was thinking, right? So this mythology that we get is if you're so in love, you know what the other person is thinking and wants, and you know, it's just ludicrous. So we have to get consent at every step of the way. We have to, if we're ambiguous or silent or we're unsure, or someone says, you got to figure that out, you got to communicate. But what's difficult about this is that we're not taught to communicate by the media that we consume, right? We're taught that that's going to ruin it, so we have to get past that. So we have to get consent at every step of the way. It needs to be affirmative consent, which means a green light, a yes to each step in the hookup or whatever it is that you're doing. And then third is that this needs to be freely given, which means free from coercion. Now, we often think about coercion as a gun to the head or a knife to the throat, because that's what we see on TV and movies, and that's exceedingly rare on college campuses. But coercion does happen on college campuses of a different kind. I want to tell you a story. So I have 2 daughters. Kara's 7, Nina is 5. They love the movie Frozen. How many of you love Frozen? So every time, this is what happens. This is what I ask every time. I say, how many of you love Frozen? And a bunch of people who I assume to be women go, yeah, I love Frozen. And then there's like a 3-second delay, and there's a bunch of people who I assume to be dudes who are like, screw it. Yeah, I love Frozen. Yeah, I love Frozen. So I'm glad you like Frozen. My 2 daughters love Frozen. They especially love Elsa because she has a blue dress, blonde hair, magical superpowers. So they want to be Elsa. They love Elsa. Anna's the hero of the show because she goes up and discovers resources within herself that she didn't understand and saves her sister, so she's the hero of the movie. Spoiler alert. But they want to be Elsa because she has a magical wand. So in our house, when Nina has the Elsa wand, and Kara, the older sister, wants it, you've got to imagine, she knows she can't just go up and grab it away from her sister, because in our house, as you might guess, consent's pretty important. So let me tell you what that looks like in my house when the younger sister has the Elsa wand and the older sister wants it. This is what that looks like. Hey, Nina, can I have it? Nina, come here. Nina, give it to me now. Nina, come on. Nina, please. Come on, Nina. Oh, thank you. Yay! Now, is that freely given? No, that is not freely given. That's nagging, badgering, maybe even harassment. So freely given means affirmative consent at every step of the way from someone who is capable of giving it under no duress or threat, okay? So a gun to the head or a knife to the throat is certainly coercion, but pretty rare on college campuses. But coercion does happen. I'll give you 4 examples from one college campus in just 1 year. Sure, I'll let you leave my room as soon as you make out with me. Not freely given. Sure, I'll help you with your lab homework as soon as you go down on me. Not freely given. If you don't have sex with me, I'll post to the first year Facebook group that you did have sex with me. Not freely given. If you don't keep having sex with me, I'll send the video I made last week that you didn't know about of us having sex to your family home in Saudi Arabia. Not freely given. Coercion does happen on college campuses, and anybody who consents to get out of a room or to avoid harm to their reputation or to their body is doing so under duress and is being coerced, and it is not freely given. So consent means at every step of the way, affirmative consent that is freely given. Make sense? What I want you to notice in these is that I explained the right answer, you all knew the right answer. It's just the messed up stuff we've learned on top of that. So you have to pay attention to the right answer, which you already know, you knew before you walked in, and we have to unlearn some of the messed up stuff we picked up along the way. This consent also needs to be informed consent, which means you're able to make an informed legal decision. There's a few situations in which you can't give informed consent. If you're 9 years old, you can't give informed consent. If you're developmentally disabled, you can't give informed consent. If you're unconscious or asleep, you can't give informed consent. If you've been drugged, you cannot give informed consent. And if you're highly intoxicated, you can't give informed consent. Now that makes perfect sense up until that last one, right? I said 9 years old and a whole bunch of you shivered, which is perfect reaction to that. But highly intoxicated, raise your hand if you've ever known anyone who's had sex after they've been drinking. Right? I know some of you are thinking, my parents, the one time that ever happened. Unless you have siblings, and then you're thinking both times. And now it's weird because here you are in an auditorium of your peers thinking about your parents having sex. You did that. You're weird, not me. You're weird, not me, right? Now, will you all raise your hand, just about all of you raise your hand when I asked, how many of you know someone who's had sex after they've been drinking? Does that mean we all know perpetrators and we all know survivors? I think that's true. I don't think that's the best indicator. Can you have something to drink and be able to make an informed decision? Absolutely. Can you have so much to drink that you're no longer able to make an informed decision and no matter what you say, your consent is invalid? Absolutely. And this makes perfect sense in other contexts. It's confusing when we're talking about sex and hooking up because our culture conflates that. But in other contexts, it makes perfect sense. If I got wasted tonight and went down to the car dealership and tried to buy a car and slurred my speech and stumbled around the lot, they cannot sell me that vehicle because I'm obviously not able to make an informed decision. And if they were to sell me that vehicle, that would be illegal, it would be unethical, and it would be immoral, right? If I can't make a decision about buying a car, I can't make a decision about what I want to do with my body with somebody else. And if I get really drunk at a bar and someone else is there getting really drunk and we leave at the same time and I get in my car and he leaves and he's walking home and I hit him and injure him or kill him, I can't say, hey, I was drinking, I'm not responsible for my decisions. I don't even remember that. I'm still responsible for what I did because I hit him. And I'm not excused for him being intoxicated. I can't say he was walking funny, he was really drunk. I hit him, so I'm responsible. That makes perfect sense, right? But that gets confusing when it comes into hookup situations because our culture teaches us that alcohol is how you get consent, when in reality, alcohol can make consent impossible to get. We've all seen messages in TV and movies and many other places that if you're interested in someone and they're not interested in you, buy them another drink, right? We see this over and over and over again. We're taught that alcohol can get us consent when in reality, the exact opposite. Someone who's so highly intoxicated they can't make a decision cannot give consent. Even if they say, yes, please, I want to. Just like if I'm at the car dealership, slurring my speech, stumbling around, saying, yes, I absolutely want to buy the pretty red one, they can't sell me that car. I'm not able to make an informed decision. So the rule is, whoever initiates the next level of sexual activity needs to be sure they're getting consent from someone who's able to give it. So if you're moving from first base to second base or second base to third base, whatever you think those are, you need to, if you're initiating that, you need to be sure you're getting consent at every step of the way. Affirmative consent is freely given. And that you also need to be sure that that person is able to give consent. And I don't know about you, but when I'm drunk, I don't have a good sense of how drunk I am, let alone how drunk other people are. So if you or the person you want to hook up with has been drinking, or both of you, you're in a very precarious situation. Because if they've been drinking, you might be interested in hooking up with someone who cannot give consent and is not capable of hooking up without being sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape. And if you've been drinking, you put yourself in a position where you may not be a good judge of whether you're asking for and receiving consent, and you may not be a good judge of whether or not that person is able to give consent. So if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you or the person you want to hook up with have been drinking, or both, you're in a very precarious situation. Thankfully, you live in one of the greatest times ever to be alive. I really believe that. You have a device that can solve that. Do you know what that is? It's your cell phone. You just see that person, you say, hey, you seem like someone I'd like to get to know better. Can I get your phone number? You get their phone number, you go home, you sleep it off, you get a meal in the dining hall at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when you're no longer hungover, you text them, you can get together, you have all the crazy sex you want. I think it's cheap and meaningless, I hope you're safe about it, but you get to make those decisions as a grown-up, right? At 2 o'clock in the morning, you maybe don't get to make those decisions. And they may not be capable of making that decision, and you may not be capable of understanding if they are capable of doing that. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you can at least know you're having a conversation where you're able to ask for and get consent and determine whether someone is able to give consent. Now this is difficult because on this campus, just like every other college campus I've been to, the alcohol scene and the hookup scene are the same scene. And so we have to make sure our own behavior does not lead to sexual violence that involves alcohol. We also have to challenge the behavior of our peers, right? If you're at the bar or the party and you see the couple that's super wasted in the corner making out with each other, stop throwing popcorn at them and go over and intervene. And say, you seem really into each other, but this is not going to happen. You both have had way too much to drink. You can get together later, but this is not going to happen. Get them home, intervene, get them home safely. Or you might see someone who just won't take no for an answer. Come home with me, come home with me. No, come home with me. Come on, come home with me. Come home with me, come home with me. Intervene. Say, this doesn't seem like it's working. Why don't you try something else, right? And make sure they're separated. Make sure that nothing happens, right? or someone who's just passed out on the couch in a vulnerable position, make sure that they get home safely, make sure that nothing happens to them. Because you have an ability to prevent sexual violence when it is imminent. And if you get a chance to do that, you're a hero. Now, is it going to be awkward to intervene in those situations? Sure. But most of you are awkward like 80% of the time anyway. It's like your superpower. Just get used to it, right? You can do this. Now, if you saw a situation that was concerning for you, and you didn't intervene because you didn't want to be awkward, and I told you the next day, remember that thing you were concerned about? It led to one of them sexually assaulting the other. Wouldn't you do anything to go back in time and say something and be a little bit awkward? I think every single one of you would. We don't have that technology, so when you see something that's concerning, intervene. There's so many different ways you can do this. The folks at Green Dot, which is a bystander program, have a great three-way strategy, right? First, the 3 Ds. First, you can be direct. Hey, this is not going to happen. You're both too drunk. Knock it off. You go home. You go home. You can just tell them the way it is, right? You can distract them. Hey, your car's getting towed. They will be halfway down the block and realize, I don't even own a car. Confused. Okay. Or you can be clumsy. You can just spill your drink. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy. Let's get you to the bathroom. Let's get you cleaned up, and then get both people home safely, right? Or you can delegate. Hey, I'm concerned about what's happened over here. Will you come help me? I need some help. You can ask the police, campus security, an RA. Sometimes the bartenders can be helpful. There's many different ways you can do this. But what I need you to do is, however awkward you are, or whatever strategy works for you, is to intervene in those situations, because you can prevent sexual violence from happening to people in this community. You can prevent a survivor from experiencing it, and you can prevent a perpetrator from perpetrating sexual violence. We can prevent that from happening. Now, the reason why we have to talk about what is sex and what is rape, as ludicrous as that is because we are all so well miseducated by the world around us. We are so well miseducated. We oftentimes say people who are sexist or racist or homophobic are ignorant or naive or uninformed. That is exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. They are very well miseducated by the world around us. And the reason why we have to do this, the ways we're miseducated, is because of the rape culture. And the rape culture is a culture around us that encourages, condones, and teaches particularly men to rape particularly women. It's very heteronormative and heterosexist, but it's also the roots of rape culture, of rape and sexual violence that happens to people of the same gender, to trans folks, and all sexual violence. The rape culture is a culture that encourages, condones, and teaches primarily men to rape primarily women. The rape culture is all around us. If you've never noticed the rape culture, it's not because it's not there, it's because it is everywhere, and because it is everywhere, you have stopped paying attention to it, you've stopped noticing it. The 4 components of the rape culture I want to talk about is the objectification of women, subordinating women's intelligence, capability, and humanity, defining masculinity as sexual conquest, and other intersecting forms of oppression. I have examples of each of these components of the rape culture. Some of you might find them offensive or even triggering, so I want to give you the heads up that there's going to be some explicit things on the screen. Some of you may find them funny. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to show you examples of the rape culture, and I'm going to unpack how these examples encourage, condone, and teach sexual violence. This first example is a Nikon magazine ad. These 2 women in this hypersexual situation, we see this as the objectification of women. When we get used to seeing women as nothing more than sexual objects over and over again in magazine ads and TV shows and song lyrics and conversations in the locker room, the chapter room, the classroom, sooner or later, for some men, it's going to get a little bit easier to treat women like objects, and that can lead to sexual violence. We might ask ourselves, why would Nikon use objectifying images to sell a camera? Well, they're bragging about their technology, which can detect up to 12 faces. And in this magazine ad, they've certainly shown this face and this face, these 2 very young women, youngly depicted women in a hypersexual situation. But the technology also detects this face, this face, this face, this face, and this face behind the curtain. Nikon made a magazine ad bragging about how their technology can point out the people in the room that these 2 women don't know are in the room, which is non-consensual, which is sexual assault. Now, you may have seen this and not noticed that, and if you didn't notice it, it's because messages like this are around us all the time, and we become desensitized to them, and we stop noticing them. This can lead to sexual violence. The next component, Mike Hawk's taxidermy, I'll stuff your beaver. This is an example of subordinating women's intelligence, capability, and humanity. It's not that we as men are incapable of seeing women in their full intelligence, capability, and humanity. It's that the culture teaches us not to, and we sometimes fall in line with that. You can see this when a man will yell something demeaning or degrading to a woman as she walks across campus, which is sexual harassment. And 10 minutes later, his friends will be giving him a hard time and make fun of his mom, and he will say, do not ever speak about my mother in that way. Because see, for him, his mother maintains her intelligence, capability, and humanity, and he chose not to see that in the woman who walked across campus. And I'm sure that can be hurtful, maybe even traumatizing to someone who's had that happen to them. But I think it says far more about his humanity than it does about hers. Boss Hog loves Cooter. This is an Abercrombie & Fitch t-shirt. I don't know how many of you wear Abercrombie & Fitch. I'll just say very briefly, if a corporate policy of racism and it is enough to get you to stop buying their crap, maybe this would be. Now this is an objectifying t-shirt. This is an homage to the Dukes of Hazzard. This is objectifying because it doesn't say I love women. It says I love Cooter, which is an objectifying language for women's pieces and parts. It's also objectifying as men. It's a men's t-shirt. It doesn't say I love Cooter. It says Boss Hog or my really large penis loves Cooter. Now, here's what you're going to come to learn in life if you haven't already. Anybody who wears a t-shirt referring to their very large penis or constantly talks about their very large penis, as a general rule in life, not going to have a very large penis. That's how that works. I don't know why, but that's just how it works, right? Don't point at people. Although I'm sure any guy who would wear this shirt is a pretty big dick, but not in the way that he thought. This is an example about how we as a culture define masculinity as sexual conquest. We define masculinity within very narrow and rigid ways. We say these are the ways you're allowed to think, feel, and behave as a man, and these are the ways you're allowed to not think, not feel, and not behave as a man. And every single one of us knows what those rules are, whether we're men or not. For 10 years, I've been researching college men and how they understand what it means to be a man. And every one of them knows these rules backwards and forwards. And when I say, when did you first learn these rules, they all say the same thing, I don't remember. They know the rules about how men are allowed to think, feel, and behave, or not think, feel, and behave before they have memories. And when we know these rules, the secret is none of us feels like we can measure up. Each one of my research participants says, I know what the rules are, but here's my secret. That's not me. I know it comes naturally to all of them, but that's not me. So I fake it. I put on a performance. I wear a mask. And the ways they wore a mask was to cover up who they really were, because they were afraid it wouldn't be man enough for you. So they cover up who they really are because it wouldn't be man enough. And they wear a mask to portray an image to you that you will see as man enough. And the ways we define what it means to be man enough is through masculinity as sexual conquest, as well as a whole bunch of other toxic ideas that are destructive, sexist, contribute to patriarchy, and damage us as men. Despite the concrete and real privileges we as men experience in this world, which are objectively measured, we also die sooner, have higher rates of stress, more frequent heart attacks, higher rates of depression, and higher rates of suicide. Because we're trying to live up to these ridiculous, absurd, and impossible expectations of what it means to be a man. And we always feel like we're failing because we're not doing it the way the culture has taught us we have to. But I'll tell you, if you identify as a man, you're man enough. Stop living up to someone else's expectations. Not the media's, not your parents', not the person sitting next to you. Don't let anybody tell you you're not man enough. You are. And as soon as you let go of living up to someone else's expectations and start living up to who you really are, in touch with your full humanity, in touch with your full authenticity, not only will your life transform, but it'll transform all the people around you. So we need to get past these toxic messages about what it means to be a man in our culture. And those of us who are men, we all know them. And all of us, across our gender identities, contribute, reinforce, and perpetuate these messages, and we need to stop. The fourth component is these other intersecting forms of oppression. One of the ways these intersecting forms of oppression function is to emasculate men. One of the ways that racism tries to function is tries to emasculate men of color. One of the ways that classism functions is tries to emasculate working class men because of the status of their job, the clothes they wear, the car they drive. And when we as men feel emasculated, we've been taught from the very earliest of ages how to handle that. 2 5-year-old boys can explain this to you on the playground. One 5-year-old boy throws the ball, it doesn't go very far. His friend says, man, you throw like a, which is misogynistic. Now the boy who threw the ball feels emasculated because his 5-year-old friend says you throw like a girl. And he needs to prove his manhood. Isn't it interesting? At 5 years old, someone would feel they need to prove their manhood. So having been called a girl, he feels the need to prop up his masculinity and get that back. And so he maybe yells a homophobic slur at his friend, which he probably doesn't even understand is homophobic because he's 5 years old, and the aggression and violence and history of oppression with those terms. But if 2 5-year-old boys know that when you feel emasculated because you don't live up to impossible expectations that the world has of you, to use misogyny and homophobia to try and get it back? Imagine how good we are when we arrive here at calling each other gay or a girl if we've been doing it since we were 5 years old. And if we've been doing it since we're 5 years old, imagine how good we are at escalating the violence and aggression and how we call each other gay or a girl. For it to still prop up my insecurities about who I am as a man and prove to you that I'm man enough because I can call someone terrible terms. These forms of oppression, part of the way they function is emasculating men who experience that oppression. And they turn to those same things those 5-year-old boys on the playground turn to. And so if you're concerned about sexism, we also have to be concerned about racism. If you're concerned about racism, you also have to be concerned about homophobia. Because racism and homophobia also contributes to sexual violence and a whole bunch of other stuff, but it also contributes to sexual violence. We have to see the intersections of all of these things. You can't care about one form of oppression and not care about the others because they are interconnected, they reinforce, and they support each other. We have to see across these issues. And so yes, you should confront the sexist things you hear in the locker room. You should also confront the homophobic things you hear in the locker room. You should confront the ways that people take up space in the classroom. You should also confront the ways that people benefit from their white privilege in the classroom. These all things interconnect, reinforce, and support each other. And if we begin to dismantle some of them, we begin to dismantle all of them. So if we're going to be effective at ending rape, at ending sexual violence, yes, we have to intervene when sexual violence is imminent. We have to intervene when two people who are highly intoxicated are making out. We have to intervene when someone won't take no for an answer. We have to intervene when someone's passed out on the couch in a vulnerable position. If you get to do that, you're a hero. But as college students, you're not going to have that many chances to do that. Maybe once in a college experience, maybe once a year, maybe some of you more than that. And if you get chances to do that, you should absolutely do that. But we also have to intervene not only when sexual violence is imminent, but at the roots of sexual violence. At the comments people make that are objectifying, at the screensaver they have on the computer that has bad messages about masculinity, at how they talk about their hookup from the weekend in the dining hall on Monday morning. We have to intervene in those things. And if you can intervene and notice the roots of sexual violence, you get a chance to do that every single day if you're paying attention. And so every single day, you can intervene in the roots of sexual violence. And when you do, you make this a community where sexual violence is less likely to happen, where every single one of you is more free to be who you are, to connect with people authentically and genuinely, to be in romantic relationships, to be in friendships, to be in community, and to be in relationships where you just want to hook up with someone, if that's what you want to do consensually and genuinely. And so we have to intervene when sexual violence is imminent, and we also have to intervene at the roots of sexual violence. And that doesn't need to be complicated. If someone talks about their hookup from the weekend before in demeaning and degrading ways, you don't have to come up at them with a 50-minute gender studies lecture. That's not necessary. You can say, that's not acceptable in my community. I don't want to have this kind of conversation in the dining hall. That's not okay with me. I'm bothered by this. Or, my favorite, you can just say, dude. You do it like this. Dude. 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 Like, they all work, right? They all work. And what we find over and over again, like, has anybody ever just kind of given you a look and you're like, I'm so sorry, I'll never do that again? Right? And you don't have to shame them and destroy them and condescend to them because they're just miseducated, just like all of us are. But if you can help them unlearn that, and you can welcome when people help you unlearn some of the things that you've unlearned, you can change this community. And yes, the administration has a role in doing that. The staff and the faculty have a role in doing that. But no one has more power to change this campus community than you, than the students who are a part of it. You know how influential the people around you are for you. Don't you think you're just as influential on them? Well, you probably don't, but you are. So intervene when sexual violence is imminent. Intervene at the roots of sexual violence. And we can change the culture on campus. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I'm often asked, why do I do this? In fact, I've been asked it about 5 times today. Why do you do this? And I tell people I do this for 3 reasons. For the potential survivors I know, the potential survivors I'll never know, and the men, including myself. The potential survivors I know, I mentioned my daughters, my partner, my mother, my sister, but also the men I know and the queer and trans folks I know. I don't want sexual violence to happen to any of them. But too often we say to college men, hey guys, 1 in 4. 1 in 4 women experience sexual assault. Think about your grandmother, your mother, your sister, and your girlfriend. Think about happening to one of the 4 women you love and care about. Now, if that helps you care about this issue for the very first time, you run with that. But I'm offended by that approach for two reasons. One, it assumes we all have girlfriends, and that's heterosexist part of the problem, not part of the solution. Two, it says, I believe you as men to be so emotionally dead inside, the only way you could possibly care about sexual violence if it happens to one of the four women you love and care about. And as a man, and someone who studies men, I know that's not true. All of us, across genders, are perfectly capable of caring about sexual violence when it happens to people we know and love, friends, acquaintances, people in our community we've never met before. People in town, people in Minneapolis where I live, people in Juarez, Mexico, people in Washington, D.C., people in Afghanistan. We are all capable of caring about sexual violence no matter who it happens to. And too much of it is done in my name because I do not speak up and stand up and address it as often as I could or as often as I should. And I do this for the men, including myself. Because living in a place where sexual violence is happening, particularly men's sexual violence, happens, diminishes my life. Diminishes my life. When I'm walking across the campus and it's dark and I'm walking alone and I see a woman who's walking in the opposite direction and she's also alone, oftentimes I'll see a few things that she might do that let me know that she might be afraid of me. She'll pull out her phone and hit 3 numbers and wait to hit send. Which 3 numbers? 911. Or maybe she'll call a friend, hey, it's me, nothing. Will you just talk to me until I get back to my room? Maybe she'll cross the street to avoid me altogether. Maybe she'll pull her keys out of her purse to use a weapon if she feels like she needs to. Or maybe she'll look at the security phone and do the constant calculus of how close is he and how fast can I run? How close is he and how fast can I run? Now I can ignore that, I can dismiss that, and I can explain it away. Or I can pay attention to it. And when I pay attention to that, I feel like I'm being seen as a potential rapist until I prove otherwise. I'm not being seen for my caring, my intelligence, my integrity, my humanity, but I'm seen as a potential rapist until I prove otherwise. That does not make me feel manly or powerful or in control. The exact opposite. It makes me feel small, it makes me feel nauseous, and it makes me furious. But let me be clear. My anger is not at all directed at the woman who fears me. My anger is directed at men who rape, who make that fear nothing more than logical, rational, and informed. Sexual violence is a reality on campuses, and people are doing what they need to do to survive, to get through that. I totally understand that. And as furious as that makes me, I will actually encourage it, because I would rather someone fear me when they need not than not pay attention to their surroundings when someone poses a threat. And if someone I've never met before, walking home at night, makes me feel that way, imagine what I would do to let them know they don't have to be afraid. How can I prove I'm not a potential rapist? I don't know how to do that. I've tried a lot of strategies. Do I slow down, or does she think I'm plotting? Do I speed up, or does she think I'm about to attack? Do I cross the street, or does she just think I'm going to circle around? Do I say, hi, I'm not a rapist, I'm just trying to get back to my office, everything's fine, you're good? That doesn't really work either. And so I have to speak out against sexual violence. Yes, because it will benefit others, but also because it will benefit me. And when we as men pay attention to how we're harmed by patriarchy and sexism and the rape culture, when we pay attention to how our lives are diminished as well, we become more effective, more consistent, and more sustainable as allies speaking out against it. And we can say we as men are harmed by the rape culture without comparing it to how women and trans folks are oppressed by it. Those are not the same. They don't even get the same count. But we also are diminished by it. And when we as men see that, or when we as white people, or as we as straight people understand that how the systems of oppression that simultaneously grant us real, concrete, and absolute privileges also harm us and diminish our lives, we become more effective, more consistent, and more sustainable speaking out. 20 years ago, I was a junior in college, and someone came to my campus to speak. It was Cornel West, who's a brilliant scholar of many things, but he was there to speak about race and racism in this country. And 20 years ago, he ended his talk in a way that I still remember. He ended his talk about race and racism by saying he's not optimistic, but he is hopeful. He explained that optimism requires evidence and data that things are getting better. And when it came to race and racism in this country, he couldn't be optimistic because the data wasn't good. But he remained hopeful because hope was a spiritual leap of faith that says, I believe we can make a difference, that we can join together, that we can change the culture. We can do it here at K-State. We can join with people across Kansas, across the United States, around the world, and we can make a difference. And we can make the world a better place than it is today. That is a spiritual leap of faith. That is hope. A belief that the world can be better, and I can be a part of making that happen. I still remember that. When it comes to sexual violence, I feel the same way. I'm not optimistic because the data's not good. That 1-4 number has been the same for 30 years. But I remain hopeful. I remain so full of hope because I get to spend time with audiences like you. You've been an awesome audience. You've been really dialed in. You've been really engaged. I really, really appreciate it. But here's my secret. I'm not here to talk to you. I'm not here to talk to you. I'm here to talk to all the people you're going to talk to. If each of you left here and talked to 5 people who aren't here tonight, in the next 24 hours, you could have enormous reach. If each of you left here and talked to 10 people who aren't here tonight, in just a short way, in a subtle way, in a small way, over the next 2 days, 10 people in 2 days, that's not a lot. You could have enormous reach. And that reach that the people in this room tonight could have by talking to 5 or 10 people could change the entire culture on this campus around sexual violence, about what is okay and what's not okay. What's a good party, what's not a good party. What's acceptable in the locker room, what's not acceptable in the locker room. What are conversations that we feel make our community better and those that destroy it for every single one of us. And you can do that. You can speak up, you can challenge those things, you can do it. Is it difficult? Yes. Can you do it? Yes. And when you do it, you will find that others will support you and back you up. But someone needs to be the first one. And so when it comes to sexual violence, I'm not optimistic, but I am so hopeful because of the change you'll make here in this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. If you've got a question, if you would come down to the microphone, please, we'd be glad to try to answer that for you. While the part of the group is leaving, I would remind you that our next Lou Douglas lecture will be on October the 10th. At 7 p.m. also in this room. Charles Blow will be here to talk about the media and the way the media is seen these days in the age of President Trump. I think it'll be a very interesting and provocative lecture. I hope you will come and participate in that as well. Any questions anybody's got, just come on down to the mic. If not, thank you for coming, and Keith will be here for a while if you'd like to come up and visit with him individually. Thanks for coming tonight.